Sound check, 1, 2, 3. Sound check, sound check, sound check, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. Green text are instructions not to be read out. Blue text, oh wait. Good morning. It is May the 30th, 2023. It is Planning Committee. I'm calling this meeting to order. All electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. And in chambers, we have Councillor Cassar, Councillor Francis, Councillor Wang, Councillor McMeekin, Councillor Taddison, Councillor Alex Wilson, Councillor Maureen Wilson, and online I see Councillor Beattie. Clerk Kelsey, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Chair Danko, there are changes. Under public meetings, the application for approval of draft plan of subdivision for 9236 and 9322 Dickinson Road West. We have added written submissions from Donna and Vern Denal, Jill Tonini, Anne Gabrielle Walker, Suzanne Cooper, Harriet Woodside, John Rademan, Bruce R. Allen, Irene Sherburl, and Stephen Suggett. Gail Lorimer, Heather Vaughn, Joan Stein, Paul Decker, Peter Banting, Myrna McBrien, Tina Brajic, Marie Covert, Laurel Imson, Don Brown, Hildy Rice-Smart, Carol Ann Forster, Christina Wilson, Nicole Doro, Kieran Larson, Victoria Koch, Haley Van Sickle, Francis Newfield, Gord McNulty, Wendy Lee Bell, Mike Robitaille, and Elizabeth Knight. And we have 2 added registered delegations from Don McLean and David Bennett.
Thank you. So I need a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended. Moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor Cassar. All in favor or opposed? That is unanimous. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest this morning from committee? Seeing none. We are going to approve the minutes from the previous meeting, May 16th, 2023. Mover and a seconder to approve the minutes as presented. Moved by Councillor McMeekin, seconded by Councillor Wang. All in favor or opposed? That is unanimous. Thank you. We have a delegation request from Scott McInnes, is it? Respecting property standards in the Ansel Wood area. This is for the June 13th meeting. Need a mover and a seconder to approve the delegation request for June 13th. Moved by Councillor Francis, seconded by Councillor Wang. Yes. Okay.
Thank you. This delegate request is from a Ward 1 resident from the neighborhood of Ainsley Wood. I have a pretty good idea generally of what it's for. I just wanted to let the Kelsey and my colleagues know that the request is for June the 13th. Just giving a heads up, I will not be here, which is kind of awkward. I'll be at ALPHA, the Association of Local Public Health Agencies, their conference. So I will try and provide as much information in advance to Elsie Kelsey on what we've been doing on matters for property standards, but I just won't be here to engage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So it was moved by Councillor Francis, seconded by Councillor Wang. All in favor or opposed? And perhaps we could advise Mr. McInnes that his ward councillor won't be present, and that perhaps a later date might be more appropriate, but it's up to him. That's unanimous. Thank you. On to consent items. 9.1 is municipal reporting on planning matters, proposed minister's regulation under the Planning Act. I need a mover and a seconder to receive the report, and then we'll go to discussion. Moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor Kassar. Any discussion on item 9.1? We'll go to Councillor Wilson first.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask a quick overview. I have two questions pertaining to the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So through the chair, I'm going to ask either Rob Lawley or Jen Hohall, who led the report, to come and give a bit of an overview. It looks like Jen won.
Through the chair, good morning. Jen Hohall, Manager of Strategy and Continuous Improvement in the Planning and Economic Development Department. So a quick overview, we had brought a report, I believe back in March, to say that there is new reporting requirements under the Planning Act, mostly focused on development applications and as well as some geospatial information. At that point, we did provide some feedback on the proposed regulation. It is now confirmed. We will be moving forward with reporting on different indicators related to the planning applications and geospatial information. The reporting will be done on a quarterly basis, so our first report is due June 30th, so coming up quite quickly. And then we also have annual reporting as well, as indicated in the report, that will begin in March 2024. So happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you very much for that overview. I think the report is telling us that the province's cost estimate of just over $3,000 may be a wee bit off, and it's double that at least set out in this report of in excess of $7,000. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the rationale for the gap. Is it just in the absence of software? Thank you, through the chair.
So through the chair, the initial assessment was done by the ministry of the approximate $3,000 for the first year. And then during consultation with municipalities, it was identified that the request was actually much larger than anticipated. So it could be for some municipalities due to technology, but also the people power behind pulling the data and validating the data as well.
Thank you, through the chair. On that, just further to that, I wasn't able to discern from the report whether the exercise that it's described and the cost estimate, is that specific to Hamilton? Are we unique in our infrastructure, for lack of a better word, gap? Or is it something that all the participating 29 municipalities are having to endure?
Through the chair, we are not unique. That estimate was actually developed by the ministry and estimated for all municipalities. That's the cost they're estimating that it would have for all municipalities that were identified under this regulation to participate.
Okay, thank you. One final question, Chair, and I appreciate the clarity, and this is a subsequent report. The data that is being requested, I trust that will be also available to council and the public. And if I could ask Jen to surmise or to opine what the value of the data will be for us in looking at trends and helping us measure outputs. Thank you, and that's my final question.
Yeah, I can start, and then if anyone else wants to add on, they can. So through the chair, we will be reporting back to the Planning Committee. Our hope is that eventually we can move towards a reporting through our open data platform and have data available publicly, but small steps first. So we'll make sure that the data is at an aggregate level is reported back through the Planning Committee. And in terms of the value, I'll pass it over to Jason to kind of give a more description.
Yes, through the chair. So it's a bit of a difficult one to answer because it is a very broad set of a data set that the province is collecting. Some I think we continue to question the value, the benefit of it, especially at a provincial level. If you think about things like data on variances and those sorts of things. There is some that I think would be useful, although much of that I think has already been reported publicly. We've been reporting publicly on approval timelines for a good 6, 7 years, 8 years, something like that now. So I think we've been a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of providing annual reporting on that kind of metric. That one I would say does have some value. There's also some value in having some consistency across municipalities, because I know one of the questions we do get asked fairly regularly with our approval timelines is how does it compare to others? And it's always been a bit of an apples to oranges comparison because everybody does it a little bit differently. So I would say there's value in some of the indicators. There's value in some of the indicators being done at a provincial level, and we certainly noted that in the comments we sent to the province on this regulation. There's others that I think cause us some concern just because of the work involved in collecting them and maybe some questionable value, especially at a quarterly basis. That was another one of our concerns when the regulation came out is this really going to get looked at the province on a quarterly basis? Notwithstanding, Jennifer and Rob and a number of folks across the department are kind of trying to get it to an automated process so it will have as little impact on staffing as possible. But I would also just note that notwithstanding the province doubling the budget estimate, I still think it is quite low in terms of the actual staffing time that will go into sort of collecting and reporting on these metrics.
Thank you to staff. Without being in your shoes, when I saw the revised estimate, I actually also thought it was extremely low. Surprisingly. So thank you very much. Appreciate the answers.
Thank you, Councillor. On the speakers list, we have Councillor Cassar, followed by Councillor Wang. Councillor Cassar?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Danko. Through you, I also share that, I guess, cynicism about the cost and it being very low. So I want to ask about that, but on page 3 of the report, there's a couple points there just highlighting a little bit what we have to put on hold in order to get this June report, I think, done. So I just wanted to ask if staff could just explain a little more on the impact, because there's financial impacts, yes, but now there's other work being put on hold, and just wanted to give an opportunity to share what that is. Thank you, through you.
So through the chair, I can start. One of the big impacts will be on our Amanda database system team, which is a group of IT analysts. So a lot of the impact, we had plans to onboard some of our other planning and economic development divisions onto that database to help improve their reporting and tracking. But we will most likely have to pause that in order to focus on some of the changes in the Amanda database that we will have to do to better automate the process of the provincial reporting. So that's the main impact. I don't know if there's anything else Jason wants to add.
So through the chair, I'd say that's a key one, and I would just note that you may recall we said something similar in 2022 when we had to similarly pause some of that work because we had to change a number of our processes as a result of Bill 23. So unfortunately, we're not where we want to be in terms of having those online portals open and available for submissions. That's been a sort of a key goal of ours for a couple of years, and this and the Bill 23 changes have caused us to delay that work for sure.
Thank you. I just wanted everyone to hear that the province is continually making more changes and continually affecting our ability to do plans that we already have in place. So thank you. That's the only question I had.
And somewhat counterproductive to the overall goal. Councillor Wang.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Similarly to Councillor Cassar's question, how will this impact some of the penalties that may be imposed upon us for Bill 109 or Bill 23, given that we are forced to do this giant change? I'm just concerned about how the timelines may impact some of the imposed penalties that the province will be putting on us.
General Manager.
So through the chair, we're continuing to prioritize meeting those Bill 109 timelines so that we don't hit those fee penalties. They are in effect as of next week, I guess, is when those start to come in effect. Any applications coming in starting next week. in the prioritization of our work, we have kept meeting those Bill 109 timelines top of mind. So our hope is that we will still continue to do that. As Jen noted, where the impact has been is more in some of the digital service delivery stuff that we've been wanting to do, that this work has had more of a direct impact on that team. So that's more what has been, is being delayed.
Thank you for that answer. Follow-up question then is, when it comes to the digital dashboards, and I know that we are working a lot on building out our open data platform, Chair, I just wanted to ask what's that sort of like step 1, step 2, step 3 for a dashboard that we as the public and as council can consume? Because I'm trying to, similarly to Councillor Wilson's sort of question, I'm trying to understand like what's supposed to hit first versus what's put on hold. So just a little clarification there, Chair.
So through the chair, so we are we are a number of steps into that process. So we already do have some services available through the online portal. We were due to launch some this year. We are actually beta testing it now, so it will be delayed, but the hope is still that it will be available by the end of the year. I would note that I could probably provide a bit more of a comprehensive update. We do have the Open for Business Subcommittee having its first meeting of this term of council in a few weeks. I can't remember the exact date. And one of the things I'd like to do at that meeting, that in the past has traditionally been where we've given an update on some of these initiatives. And I can provide a bit more of a fulsome update there. But I don't want to give the impression that this work hasn't started or isn't continuing. We are well into it. A lot of the work to date has been around building the Amanda database that Jen mentioned and getting all of the different kind of internal review processes onto that database. That's kind of the foundation that has to be laid before we can actually have that public-facing component. But perhaps if it's at the Open Business Subcommittee, I could give a bit more of a updated timeline for when we expect to bring those on board.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. Councillor McMeekin.
Yes, thanks, Chair Danko. Just a question. We're very well represented at FCM and AMO, and I'm very thankful for that. I'm wondering, is this the kind of thing that AMO talks about? Is this an agenda item, these kinds of planning changes that impact all municipalities? Yes, please, I do, yeah. That's why I'm asking, yeah.
So I will be attending the board retreat that will happen in the middle of June. And in terms of the agenda, that hasn't been set out. But we do talk about Bill 23 and Bill 109. And we do talk about several initiatives that we as the 444 municipalities have embarked on. I wouldn't say that this has particularly made the agenda, but it's something that I can definitely bring up at the board retreat in the middle of June.
Okay, I think, yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor. So no further speakers. Item was moved and seconded to receive. All in favor or opposed? That is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to public hearings. The public has been advised of how to pre-register to be a delegate at the public meetings on today's agenda. Members of the public, in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, please be advised that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Council of the City of Hamilton before Council makes a decision regarding the development applications before us today, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Council of the City of Hamilton to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal, unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. Item 10.1 is an application for zoning bylaw amendment for lands located at 300 Albright Road in Hamilton in Ward 5. Does the committee wish to see the staff presentation? Yes, thank you. So we have Elena Baldessera.
Good morning, Chairman, Planning Committee, and the general public. My name's Elena Baldessera, and I'm the Planner 1 on the urban team who processed the application. The application before you today is located at 300 Albright Road, and the proposal is for a zoning bylaw amendment application. So what you see on the screen is an aerial of the subject lands. The building currently shown has been demolished. It was a previous school that was removed as part of the application. The site is located on the north side of Albright Road, on the west side of Mount Albion Road, and it's located next to Red Hill Neighborhood Park on the east side. So this is just the location map. It shows the zoning of the subject lands as well as what the zoning is proposed to be changed to. So as you can see, the P1 zone on the east side, on the west side, is the neighborhood park. And then there are townhouses directly adjacent to the property on the other side. So this is the concept plan of the proposed application. The proposal is to add townhouses to the subject lands on a condominium road. The proposal includes 96 stacked townhouses, which is majority of the site, with about 5 standard townhouses on the northeast corner. There's a bit of an area that you can see that does not have any development on it. So as part of the application, there was a natural heritage zone identified. The natural heritage zone was staked by both the Conservation Authority as well as our natural heritage planning staff. And that portion of the property is actually proposed to be zoned conservation/hazard land, or P5 zoning. That includes both the feature and the vegetative protection zone. So this is just elevations of the proposed development. The proposed development these are the stacked townhouses, and there's multiple versions of them. So I'll just run through them a little quickly. This would be the side view of the proposed stacked townhouses. Again, another form of the townhouses. So what I wanted to show here is these are actually the 5 standard townhouses that are on the northeast corner of the subject lands. And then the side view is what's shown next on the property. So these are just some site visit photos that I took. This is the actual subject land. As I said, the building that was shown on the aerial has been removed. So what we have on the south side of Albright Road is an existing elementary school as well as a church. These are the existing townhouses that are adjacent to the proposed development. And then this would be the view of the from the subject lands of the neighborhood park. Adjacent to the neighborhood park is actually another school. It was decommissioned, but there's an application in to convert it to a private school. So that's what that building is on the left-hand side of the image. So overall, thank you for attending the presentation. Staff has reviewed the application, and we are recommending approval. We believe that it meets all of the provincial policy documents as well as the Urban Hamilton official plan policies. The subject proposal is compatible with the surrounding townhouses and the institutional uses that are easily accessible. And it includes a component of conservation and hazard land zoning to actually protect the feature on the subject lands. So I'm happy to take any questions, and I can go back to the concept plan if anybody wants to see it.
Thank you, Elena. On our speakers list, I have Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Elena. Just wanted to get a clarification because I saw that the townhouses that are adjacent to this, are they 2-3 stories, and then these maisonettes are going to be 4 stories?
So the stacked townhouses are going to be 3 stories
Okay.
based on the elevations. The existing towns would be 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's in and around the same sort of height, just.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the things that we made sure to add was a increased sort of side yard setback as well as a fair setback from the existing towns, just given that that is their rear yard. So we wanted to make sure they weren't too close for privacy reasons.
That's it. Those are
Through
my
the chair, sorry.
questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. No further speakers, so we're just going to receive the staff presentation. Moved by Councillor Francis, seconded by Councillor Wang. Thank you. Thank you. That is unanimous. We have Stephanie Merticic. My apologies with that. Please correct me when you come to the mic. With MHBC Planning and Land Development in attendance today.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Murdich, and as mentioned, I'm a planner with MHPC Planning. Good morning to members of committee, staff, and the public. This morning, I'm here to speak to 300 Albright Road, the zoning bylaw amendment application on behalf of Valerie Holmes. So thanks, Elena, for your presentation. You did a great job of covering the site context. So I'll just breeze through this and try to focus on additional information this morning. I just wanted to highlight a couple of additional items as I move through some of these slides. So just wanted to highlight the site context in general. So the site, as noted, is adjacent to the Red Hill Neighborhood Park and adjacent to a site that was recently developed for townhouses. Generally, it's well located with commercial and institutional uses and within the broader transportation network in the city. And again, just a couple of site photos looking north. Again, you can see those recently constructed two-story townhouses on the east side. And just looking east towards Mount Albion Road, which is a collector road, and just on the right-hand side of the screen is the St. Luke's Catholic Church and another elementary school. And just a brief background on the application here. One thing I just wanted to add is that we did also host a virtual neighborhood information meeting in January of 2022. We had about 10 residents attend that meeting. Really, the purpose of the meeting was just to provide residents in the community with some additional information about the project and answer any questions. So generally, we've worked with staff through a revised townhouse concept from 106 to 101 units. Policy framework, the key things here really are focusing that the proposal conforms with the medium density policies in the Urban Hamilton Official Plan, and the proposed application for the rezoning is similar to recent townhouse developments in the city and the surrounding area with site-specific regulations. So this is just a brief slide on the initial concept plan and where we started, and I'll just focus on some of the feedback that we got on the application and ultimately the final concept that is before committee this morning. So in terms of comments received, a lot of the technical comments and public comments were similar in nature. So a big focus of this application was on the natural heritage setback that Elena mentioned at the rear of the site. A detailed environmental impact study was completed, which looked at the overall developable area of the site. And we worked with staff to identify that limit and then appropriately zone the conservation area and incorporate a buffer for the development. The vehicle access was also studied in detail and shifted slightly to the west, which you'll see on the plan. And additional information on landscaping and the design of the stacked towns was requested and provided to staff as well. In terms of public comments, concerns primarily related to visitor parking and allocation, and traffic concerns and school safety and the access location. So the final concept plan, again, reduced to 101 rental units from originally 106. The vehicle access was shifted to be more central to the site on Albright Road, slightly to the west of where it was previously proposed, and that was reflected with the traffic study that was completed and with review with city staff. Two of the buildings were shifted a bit south to protect those environmental areas at the rear of the site that I mentioned. And the parking rate was slightly increased to try to accommodate some increase in visitor parking. We also added a common outdoor amenity area central to the site. This is just a quick slide that really shows how the parking is allocated. So about 75% of the stacked townhouse units do have garages, and the remaining unit spaces are surface parking spaces. And then there's the remaining surface parking spaces are available for visitors. The block of towns at the rear is a 5-unit block of standard 2-story towns, each with a garage and a driveway space. This is just detailing the proposed zoning. I think the site-specific regulations are all detailed in the staff report. Again, really the main change was the reduction in 5 units and a slight increase in parking. So these are just some additional renders that I think help to show what the product may look like. I did just want to clarify that the stacked units technically would be a 4-story unit, but we did do quite a bit of work with staff on the design, looking at the heights of the comparable 2-story product, ensuring there was sufficient setbacks for landscaping, and then also ensuring that any amenity space was located internal to the site to provide that privacy separation for the adjacent units. And this is just a conceptual design of the townhouses. Again, the final details will come through at the site plan application stage, but this gives an idea of similar products and what these may look like. So here's just a list of the technical studies that were completed, submitted and reviewed by staff and technical agencies, and are summarized in the staff report. Generally, all of these studies were requested at the pre-consultation stage. The only additional study completed was the transportation impact study at the request of staff, and also to satisfy some of the neighborhood questions and concerns. So in summary, the proposed development is consistent with the provincial planning framework and conforms to the Urban Hamilton official plan for medium density residential. Overall, it provides a unique opportunity to add 101 rental townhouse units. They are 3-bedroom units, so offering a family-friendly housing option into the neighborhood, and offering an appropriate form of intensification that we believe is compatible with the surrounding area. We request that you would support the staff recommendation and approve the application, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and I think you said it, but I might have missed it, just you're in support of the staff recommendations?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Ms. Murdich? Councillor Wang?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just a quick clarifying question, because I think that we were conferring over here, but it's 101, which means that it is 5 standard townhouse units and 96 stacked townhouses. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
A follow-up question then is, I appreciate the amount of studies that have happened in this consultation, but are there any of those units designed for accessibility standards at all? Through you, Chair.
Through the chair, it's a good question. We did have this conversation with the applicant. So the stacked towns are not barrier-free units. They do require stairs to go in it. I believe there's typically 3 to 5 risers required to enter into those units. The units are designed to meet a certain level of accessibility once you're in the unit. Things like barrier-free kitchens and washroom designs are available. The 5 standard towns, however, would offer more of an opportunity for a barrier-free accessible unit design.
Okay. Last question then is, I also really love the conservation of that land at the backside of the property, but are there any sort of amenities like playgrounds that could be built into the design just for neighborhood, considering that most of those are all townhouses in that neighborhood now, and there may not be adequate play structures or park space? So is that something that the applicant might consider? Through you, Chair.
Through the chair, that was part of our reasoning for adding the common amenity space that is proposed central to the site. That wasn't part of the original application. The details of that amenity space haven't been provided at this point. It is adjacent to the neighborhood park as well, but definitely we will be looking at what the design of that amenity space will include, and I think we'll have to take the demographic and the needs of the community into account at that time.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Not seeing any further questions from committee. Thank you, Stephanie. Good to see the renders went from 8-bit to HD.
Thank you.
So we'll be receiving the delegation. It was moved by Councillor Francis, seconded by Councillor Wang. All in favor or opposed? That is unanimous. Thank you. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak to this item? 10.1, application for zoning bylaw amendment for lands located at 300 Albright Road in Hamilton. Seeing none. Second time, are there any members of the public, either present or online, that wish to speak to this hearing? And a third and final time, members of the public that wish to speak to the application for zoning bylaw amendment for lands located at 300 Albright Road in Hamilton, item 10.1 on today's agenda. I am not seeing any, so we will, the public submissions regarding this matter were received and considered by the committee, and that the public meeting be closed. Moved by Councillor McMeekin. Sorry. Okay. It was moved by Councillor McMeekin, seconded by Councillor Francis. Thank you. Councillor Beattie wants to speak. Oh, Councillor Beattie, did you have something to say?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Thank you. It's a comment, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time. You can guide me through this. I just had a comment to make on not necessarily the application, but the situation at the appropriate time.
Okay, well, we're going to receive the public, or we're going to receive the delegations and close the public meeting, and then we'll move on to the report. I'm going to Councillor Francis first, and then I'll put you on the list.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. So to close the public meeting and that there was no public delegations.
If there were public submissions in the staff report.
Sorry, Mike.
There were public submissions in the staff report, and it's an OLT requirement that we officially receive them.
Received and considered.
And I'm sorry, I missed the mover and seconder.
It was Councillor McMeekin and Councillor Francis. That is unanimous. Thank you. And now on the report, mover and a seconder to approve the report recommendations and put the report on the floor for discussion. Moved by Councillor Francis, seconded by Councillor Cassar. So I'm going to go to Councillor Francis first, and then I have Councillor Beattie and Councillor Cassar on the speaker's list. Councillor Francis.
Thank you, Chair, and I echo the concerns raised by constituents in the correspondence. Traffic is increasing in the neighborhood. I see it daily. I live right down the street from this development. Between the new local developments, this is the third educational institution that's been converted to housing in this proximity. Combine this with the overcrowding of schools, there's no doubt the way our neighborhood functions is changing rapidly, and I find it extremely concerning. I also understand that there's an obvious need for new parks, housing, and developments that fit within our communities. The goal is to find a balance between the two. I will support the staff recommendation to allow building townhouses in the neighborhood, which is far more sensible than the massive and concerning development at Foodland. I'm looking forward to the development of the Red Hill Neighborhood Park within the coming years, which is adjacent to this proposal, as you saw. It'll be a welcome addition to the neighborhood. Looking forward to collaborating with the community on this. What I will not support, which will have large negative impact on our neighborhood, is the destructive, far too intense, disrespectful to residents with major traffic impacts, along with losing our only grocery store and many amenities, is the development at Foodland by Medallion on Green Hill and Mount Albion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beattie?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Similar comments to my colleague from Ward 5. Mine are more along the lines of having been a part of the district school board process when this property was liquidated. I'm looking at the proposal and thinking about missed opportunities in terms of finding spaces to provide affordable housing options to the community. And there's a number of these that have come forward and will continue to come forward. And I think I've said this before and I'll say it again, that we really need to take a good hard look at surplus school properties in terms of our role in assisting with their acquisition and bringing these properties on stream into an affordable housing mix. And hopefully this new council will take a look at this in a different light. The number of units that are being constructed Hey, that's fantastic. I agree with Councillor Francis in terms of the density is much more appropriate for the area than some of the other proposals, and very pleased to see that. I'll support this this application, but moving forward, I hope we get the opportunity as properties become available from either of our publicly funded district school boards that this council would take a more engaged approach into possibly acquiring them for greater use. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kassar?
Thanks, Chair Danko. Just a couple of words in support of the application. I think this is exactly the kind of missing middle housing that we need and infill density, creating infill density. And I also wanted to just point out positively on page 4, the reduction in parking minimums. The modifications proposed are to reduce the parking required, as was touched on in the presentations, which I think is also a great way to have more housing, and more space for people and less for cars. So that's all.
And 50% landscape area. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wang? No? Okay. So if there's no further speakers, item was moved by Councillor Francis. Can't remember the seconder. Councillor Kassar, thank you. All in favor or opposed? That is unanimous. Thank you. On to item 10.2. This is an application for approval of draft plan of subdivision for lands located at 9236 and 9322 Dickinson Road West in Glanbrook in Ward 11. Does the committee wish to see the staff presentation? Yes. Thank you. So we have Aminu Bello. Aminu?
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee, staff, and public. My name is Aminu Bello. I'm a planner with the Development Planning Section, Suburban Team, and I'm here today to discuss the draft plan of subdivision application for the lands located at 9236 Dickinson Road West and 9233 Dickinson Road West in Glanbrook. The subject lands are located within the Airport Growth and Employment District. It's located directly north of the John C. Munro International Airport, and the subject lands measure 37.3 hectares in size, and is located north of Dickinson Road West and west of Upper James Street in Glanbrook. The draft plan subdivision application proposes to create one block for industrial development, one block for future development, a vegetation protection zone, one block for a road right-of-way widening, as well as a temporary cul-de-sac and new municipal road to provide connection from Dickinson Road West. Access to the planned subdivision will be provided from Dickinson Road West, as mentioned. Of note, the subject lands are currently zoned airport industrial, or airport prestige business, and airport light industrial, the M11 and M10 zones, and conservation hazard lands, P5 zone in zoning bylaw 05200. Currently, the zoning is in place, has been enforced in effect since 2015, and through the Ontario Land Tribunal's decision, through the Airport Growth District secondary plan for the creation of the also new zones under zoning bylaw 05200. Again, this graphic here just depicts the subject lands. Just to note that the draft plan of subdivision here in front of us today is for phase 1 of the development, which is denoted in green. The balance of the lands are considered phase 2, which be subject to a future draft plan of subdivision application to consider development and require conditions for the balance of the land. Also to note, the P5 zone is located in the central portion of the lands, and that is currently the provincially significant wetland. That's zone P5, and it's also known as the Upper 20 Mile Creek complex, and that's a provincially significant wetland. Here's a concept plan of the subject lands. I'm not sure why there's a blue or purple hatch over the property, but I'll just improvise here and provide a second to see what's happening here. So this is the second version of the concept plan that shows the building layouts. So this is not the draft plan, but essentially just shows what the layout is. So the first phase includes the industrial development and well, plus or minus 400 square meter or 40,000 square meter industrial building. And also includes a road widening along Dickinson Road West, as well as vegetation protection zone for a small balance of 0.06 hectares for a portion of the upper 20 Mile Creek provincially significant wetland. Also here you can see provincial significant wetland that's outside of the subject lands, as well as the connection from Dickinson Road West for a new municipal road connection to provide access to this subject development. So now I'm going to flip back to the slide deck, so just bear with me for a sec. So the next set of photos will walk you through a photo tour of the subject lands. So here we have a view looking west from Dickinson Road West. To the background, we can see the existing industrial uses, the airport industrial related, notably the Amazon fulfillment facility located south of the subject lands. Next, we have the property known as 9236 Dickinson Road West. This is the existing single attached dwelling located on the subject property. It's proposed to be demolished. Here we have a view looking north on the subject lands for the property known as 9322 Dickinson Road West. In the background, we can see the existing mature trees located along the property line. Next, we have a property looking directly east. This is the adjacent property. This is the existing manufacturing building and existing single detached dwelling. And looking northeast, we can see the existing Amazon fulfillment center and the airport lands over to the left side of your screen or right side of your screen, as well as other airport-related industrial uses. That concludes my presentation. Staff recommends approval of this draft plan of subdivision application as is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to the growth plan, conforms to Urban Hamilton official plan and zoning bylaw 05200. This concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be gladly open to answer any.
Thank you, Aminu. Could we close the PowerPoint and go back to the building layout drawing? Because I think I was seeing still the cutoff version. I think it's important for us to be able to see the building layout, the location of the wetland, the road configuration full. So just close the PowerPoint. That's the problem? There we go. Maybe you could just give the description of what we're seeing there again, because we missed it in the original presentation.
So the phase one of this subject development includes Street A, which is connecting from Dickinson Road West. and there's a temporary cul-de-sac to provide access to the first phase of development. And the black area that's kind of showing the boundary, we can see it goes south of the provincially significant wetland, and it's about, it provides a second area there that's south of the wetland that will provide opportunities for conserving some of the trees and a tree compensation area. Also, the footprint of the building you can see here, it's measured about 40,000 square feet, and it's the major warehouse facility that's proposed on the subject lands, and that's phase 1 of the development.
Okay, thank you. So open up the floor to questions from committee. On my speakers list, I have Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Planner Bello, for your presentation. Just wanted to get clarification as to how far away the Amazon facility actually is, because based on those pictures, it looks like it's a fair distance away, but then there's another picture where there's another facility that's like right adjacent to it, so.
I'm going to reshare the presentation just to provide some context here and bring up the aerial photo. Through the chair, to answer the councillor's question, the subject property is about 300 meters from the existing airport industrial facilities at the corner of Dickinson and Upper James, as a crow flies, pretty much.
Okay. Follow-up question then, through you, Chair, is how are we planning for this, like the adjacent facilities? Are we, because it's kind of kitty corner, they feel like they're very separated out. I know they are all part of the AEGD. What about the property subject lands that are directly across the street from the Amazon facility, essentially on either side of this parcel? What are they currently zoned as, and what are they currently being envisioned for in the future?
I'll flip to the zoning map just to provide some context here through the chair.
We're giving that laptop a good workout today.
So south of the subject lands, it's zoned U1, which is obviously the John C. Munro International Airport. To the west, the property is zoned Airport Prestige, which is the M11 zone. To the north, similar zoning, M10, which is the Airport Light Industrial Zone. And to the east and west, similar M1 and M11 zones, which support airport-related zoning and uses.
Okay. Again, as a little more clarification through you, Chair, I see there's a lot of P5s that are in that zoning. So as a municipality, what is our plan to continue to keep with the P5 sort of zoning and to maintain that wetland and ensure that we're not paving over that space?
Through the chair to Councillor Wang. The Airport Employment and Growth District Secondary Plan has a design with nature principle. So essentially, the proponent has proposed a vegetation protection zone, which provides 30 meters around the provincially significant wetland. And in addition to that, the proponent has also provided low impact development measures through the site. For example, rooftop storage of stormwater management, as well as low impact development measures such as grass swales and underground storage facilities for stormwater management. So essentially, the intent is to have post-development flows and stormwater management to mimic pre-development conditions, and through the direction of the environmental impact assessment, there won't be any negative impacts to those existing natural features. And through, as I mentioned earlier, the vegetation protection zone and the low impact development measures will ensure that there's no negative impacts to those provincially significant wetlands, as well as the drainage water courses that are running through the property as well. Just to note, if I flip to the aerial photo, it's a bit zoomed out, but connecting to those provincially significant wetlands are what's called headwaters, or more of water courses that connect going south and west. Those are part of phase 2, especially the one that's connecting to the west. Phase 1 does have what's called Headwater 4 identified in the EIS. that is proposed to be altered, but there are stormwater management principles and low-impact development measures that are implemented in the draft plan subdivision and through conditions that will ensure that the impacts are not negative from an environmental perspective.
Chair, I have two more questions. One of which is, as we build, imagine that we do all of this and we are moving forward on these developments. What are the future impacts of, say, essentially truck idling, parking lot clearing, especially with like salt runoffs from that level of like actual activity on the wetlands? Has that been put into consideration at all?
Through the chair to Councillor Wang, there has been consideration, especially from a salt perspective, the snow storage areas. I'll flip to the concept plan. Just bear with me for a second. So around the periphery of the building, there are parking areas that have snow storage locations that are away from the wetland. So the wetland's obviously to the north here.
Okay.
And through the construction process, there are going to be measures such as erosion and sediment control fencing, silt fencing, things of that nature that will be more addressed at the site plan stage that will mitigate impacts from salt and things of that nature.
Thank you. My last question then is, should we deny this application? What is the possible next steps? What are the actual, like, what happens if this gets denied?
Through the chair to Councillor Wang, should this application be denied, there's rights in the Planning Act for the applicant in terms of appeals, so that is an avenue they could pursue. But to answer it simply, the lands are zoned for this use. They are designated for airport-related uses in our official plans, so there are policies in place that support, as I mentioned earlier, a design with nature and some of the principles in those policy documents. The applicant has made efforts to comply to those policies, but to answer your question simply, the lands are zoned for that use. They are designated for these uses in the official plan, and there are avenues should staff or should the committee deny this application, mechanisms for an appeal within the application's or applicant's rights.
Thank you, Chair. So I feel like that's very clear. These lands are designated for this use entirely. It is also, there are other mechanisms should we deny this application moving forward, and likely that those mechanisms will likely still push forward on this. So thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Planner Bello.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. Councillor Taddison.
Thanks for your presentation today. Through the chair, could you talk a little bit more about the tree remediation?
So to the chair, to Councillor Taddison, there has been a tree protection plan and submitted in support, or not in support, to support the application. There's about 236 trees that are proposed to be removed of the plus or minus 1,200 that are located within the site. That is for phase 1 of the development. The tree protection plan has not been approved by staff, but it has been imposed as a condition as a draft plan of subdivision. There are some technical concerns that need to be addressed, but I would not say that those are material to approval or denial of this application in front of us today.
When you say technical concerns, can you dive a little deeper into that?
I could defer to Melissa Kitty. She's Natural Heritage staff here with us today, just to kind of provide a little bit more background on the tree protection and the trees that are proposed to be removed and the balance of the trees that are going to be compensated.
Thank you. Melissa, just please introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. Melissa Kitty, Natural Heritage Planner with Heritage and Urban Design. So through the chair, some of the technical questions that I had was really dealing with the the nuts and bolts of the tree protection plan in terms of understanding the mitigation measures required, where the tree protection fencing would be going, specific trees, if they could retain some more of those trees, as well as just ensuring that tree protection fencing is installed. And then in answer to the question, there will be some, as part of the mitigation measures identified, there will be some seedling saplings within that north-south hedgerow that will be salvaged and planted in that tree compensation area.
Councillor?
So it's a thorough tree plan situation here that's going to not have any net loss of trees.
Through the chair to the councillor, there will be required compensation of 1-to-1 trees. That's the city's policy, that for any tree that is 10 centimeters or greater, then a 1-for-1 compensation is required for those that are being removed. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Thank you. And just one further question. With the wetland area, the water to the northeast that flows out of this district, that's not going to be impeded in any way for the existing wildlife that depends on that. Could you discuss that for us, please?
Through the chair to councillor, there is a wildlife restoration plan, or that's going to be a condition of this draft plan of subdivision, and that will include measures, mitigation measures for mimicking and implementing wildlife habitat for the existing turtles, bats, and other types of wildlife that were identified through the environmental impact assessment provided in support of this application. So essentially, in terms of your first initial question, in terms of the water course, again, there is a vegetation protection zone provided around the provincially significant wetland. So that's a mitigation measure that's implemented in order to ensure there's no adverse negative impacts.
Thanks so much. Just one more question through the chair. It's about the road enhancements to Dickinson Road. What's going to be the eventual picture of what Dickinson Road West will look like as this development proceeds?
Through the chair to the councillor, Dickinson Road West, the ultimate right-of-way width will be 45 meters wide. That will include 4 lanes. And essentially, in terms of a pedestrian element, there will be a shared use path connection in lieu of the standard 1.8 meter sidewalk. So there'll be a 3-meter shared use path along here to integrate multiple modes of transportation, pedestrians, bikes, cyclists, etc. So that's additional to the standard 26 meters that's required under the Airport Employment District Secondary Plan, where we're providing additional 45 meters, and that will also include drainage swale for stormwater management and drainage purposes.
Thank you. Just one more question through the chair. What will the eventual connections be for trucks leaving this area to the highway network?
Through the chair to the councillor, good question. Essentially, Dickinson Road West does connect to Upper James. So vehicle traffic, that's a major arterial road, can find connections to Highway 6 or via Highway 3 through multiple different highway and road network connections. But essentially, the major traffic will be coming out of the site, turning left, going on Upper James, using that route. Or depends on where their end routes are, they could go further west on Dickinson Road to use other transportation routes further west.
Okay, can I just dive a little deeper into that with Director Hollingsworth? Could we talk about trucks leaving this area and traveling to the west? What will the eventual truck route be that is in your master plan?
Through the chair, Brian Holler, Hollingworth, Director of Transportation, Planning and Parking. Right now, in this area, the truck route system consists of Upper James, a portion of Airport Road, obviously the Provincial Highway 6, and Rymal Road and Garner. Coming out of this site at Dickinson, they would be required to take the shortest path to one of those routes. We have in the truck route master plan identified Dickinson Road as being, as the AGD builds out, looking at that as a truck route in a phased manner consistent with the industrial development. And I should clarify, that's Dickinson Road, west of Upper James.
So through the chair, at some point, it's going to hook up with that number 6 bypass or possibly the 403 in a more direct route than it currently does?
Yes, the AGD Transportation Master Plan, which is being updated as we speak, soon to be finalized, identifies a number of improvements, including Book Road and connections to Highway 6.
Thank you, Director. No more questions.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not seeing any further questions from committee, so we need a mover and a seconder to receive the staff presentation. I believe, or did I already have? It was moved by Councillor Taddison, seconded by Councillor Francis. All in favor or opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you, Aminu. We have James Webb with Webb Consulting here today. James, call you to the podium.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I've just asked Aminu for a little technical assistance before I begin. This is my first opportunity actually to appear before this committee, and pleasure for me to be here today and look forward to working with you over this term of council. Again, my name is James Webb. I'm a professional land use planner based here in Hamilton, and speaking to you today on behalf of the property owner, Greg Han 11 Properties Limited Partnership.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you. Elsie, Kelsey, do we have to take down that PDF?
And if we need it back, you'll come and help me. Before I begin, I'm providing you the details of what's before you today. I think it's very important that you understand who it is that's behind this application. The development management company, Panattoni Development Company, is an international developer of renowned success. They've been around a significant period of time, and they are one of the front leading innovators and builders of industrial floor space. Just as a point of reference, in the past 12 months in Europe, the United States, and Canada, they either completed or commenced 75 million square feet of industrial space. As a point of reference, Hamilton's total today is 53 million. So on an annual basis, appreciate the significance and the magnitude of what it is that they're doing. PDC came to Hamilton in 2018, and again, appreciate who it is that's here and that is currently developing. They're well respected in the industry, and they are so because of the very good relationships that they develop with the municipalities in which they come to deliver their product. They are very responsive to the public interest. They work well with staff. Their approach is, what can we do to get this development through the process as quickly as possible, recognizing in totality that they have obviously a responsibility to the public interest and full compliance with municipal planning frameworks and the interests of the broader community. At the present time, Panattoni have 5 ongoing development projects within the city of Hamilton. There's the Mount Hope industrial projects. One of the councillors was pointing to the Amazon project. That's within that Mount Hope, the former Orlick plan of subdivision. There are 5 buildings in total that are planned there. 3 of those are now completed and tenanted. There's an additional building under construction and 1 final building that's being refined as we speak. That represents 2.9 million square feet of floor space. And in terms of magnitude and economic benefits, $640 million of investment in building materials and infrastructure, over 4,500 jobs, and $4 million into the municipal coffers on an annual basis for property taxes. They have additional projects on 20 Road, 6140 20 Road West. They have an adjoining site on Upper James that we're working through with municipal staff. We're trying to resolve big picture issues there through collaborations on infrastructure planning, predominantly roads. We have a site in Waterdown at 43 Highway 5, and the matter before you today, Dickinson Road. Cumulative investment from those projects is in the range of $1.2 billion. That's what this company is bringing to Hamilton and delivering on sites, and their focus is delivering on sites that are already designated and preferably zoned for industrial uses. They're the one that brings the end users to the site through their activities. In addition to that revenue, also appreciate the significant amount of monies that are being spent on development charges and infrastructure. That's who's before you today on this one little project. Dickinson Road Phase 1 draft plan of subdivision. As noted, the lands today are fully zoned, in fact, do represent a phenomenal case study of land use planning in the city. These lands were marketed to Panattoni as shovel-ready. They're within the Airport Employment Growth District. They're zoned for the development. They're ready to go. But before you can proceed, you need to complete the planning process, and that's why we're here before you today. We have before this committee an application for draft plan of subdivision that's going to implement the necessary infrastructure in the form of new roads, of a new street that goes through the center of the site, widenings to Dickinson Road, and there's a raft of conditions that you'll see attached to your staff report that obligate Panattoni to fulfill their obligations in terms of building the necessary infrastructure to ensure that the city's financial interests are respected, there is efficient and cost-effective use of that existing infrastructure, and where appropriate, the necessary investments in new infrastructure. You heard comments from the city's planner that commented on an added layer of what's significant about the Airport Employment Growth District, and that when it was first thought of in 2010, the foresight was towards ensuring environmental sustainability. It has what is unique to the city in that there's a full policy gamut that deals for matters of sustainable building design, whether it's energy conservation, efficient green building materials, the use of LIDs, and the protection of environmental features. That's all boiled into the policy framework that we're subjected to as this application proceeds. The development also realizes significant municipal infrastructure. You heard there's a widening of Dickinson Road. We're contributing 12.5 meters to its ultimate width. We're contributing a new municipal road allowance up the center of the property. And again, on the aspect of environmental innovation, we are implementing the city's new standard as to how to build a collector road. It used to be 26 meters. We've widened them because the new cross-section needs to take into consideration opportunities for groundwater infiltration. So the roads have got bigger, but for the benefit of the environment. We've been studying these lands since acquisition. And there's been significant environmental reporting that's been done and work that's still to be done. We had to obviously complete a full, comprehensive, and fulsome environmental impact study that's been submitted to the City of Hamilton. It's been reviewed by the city's environmental planners, and it's been reviewed by the Conservation Authority. We've achieved the benchmark of the approval of that higher level environmental study, and that then enables us to come before this committee because we've set the boundaries of development. We've determined what portions of lands can be developed, and where the sensitive areas are and what those limits need to be, plus the necessary buffers to ensure the protection of what's there today. That aligns with the policies of the city's official plan, which is exceptionally rigorous in terms of its requirements. We come to you at this stage. It might be shovel-ready, but we still need to do those studies to determine exactly what lands can be developed, what lands need to be protected, And as you'll see in the attachment, the conditions of approval, there's still significant work to be done, but because we've set the limits of development, we can now proceed. We have conditional site plan approval, and the list of studies that we still need to complete in that context are significant and further enshrine the protection of the environment. Tree protection plan, as you heard from staff, is being finalized. Native species transplant planting plans for all the buffers using native tree species, invasive species management plan, habitat enhancement restoration plan. All of those works subject to the satisfaction of the Conservation Authority and the city, and all subject to ongoing monitoring once the work is done. There is a second phase to come, but obviously additional studies and further applications are required. But this application allows Panattoni to get going with this initial building and proceed with an application that has been conditionally site plan approved. I think, Mr. Chairman, I'll leave my comments there. We did see a flurry of submissions yesterday with respect to, there's an interest group that only unfortunately became aware of this project at a later date. They didn't take into consideration what we posted on the site in terms of the information that's available, the contact details for myself and our project team. The project has been on the city's website as an active development application that enables people to understand what's been done. And I think to that group, you know, there needs to be a reassurance that what's been done by our team to the satisfaction of the city has been a fully comprehensive evaluation of all those natural heritage features. Again, appreciating the lands are zoned, but we still need to ensure the proper protection of those areas. The areas that are zoned P5, when initially set out in zoning, you know, that's a 50,000-foot evaluation. We go in and evaluate those and refine those through an EIS, and that's what's been done. That's what's been achieved, and the draft plan before you today implements those very boundaries. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude my comments. I'd be pleased to assist committee if there are any follow-up questions. If there are delegations and follow-up questions from that, I'd be pleased to come back. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a speakers list, and just so I'm clear that you are in support of the staff recommendation, the staff report.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. We are.
Thank you. So on our speakers list, questions to Mr. Webb, I have Councillor Alex Wilson, followed by Councillor Maureen Wilson and Councillor McMeekin. Councillor Alex Wilson.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, appreciative of learning a bit more about who behind kind of the numbered companies or the numbers we see is planning this development, some of their background, did a quick Google search, claims to be the most sustainable floor space builder, warehouse builder of this kind of industry in Europe. So that's really exciting that that's a claim that's being put forward. I have some questions regarding how does that factor into North American operations and what's going on here to kind of parallel that maybe excellence that's being promoted to more of a European audience. And so with respect to the tree protection policy, understanding that there's a one-to-one replacement and understanding that the square footage of the building has largely, where possible, it does seem, avoided treed areas. The one exception being the parking lot on the east side, which is entirely over the bordered wood row. What consideration was done when scoping out the developable area to avoid removing those trees through you, Chair, for the purpose of parking, not for the building itself?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, a fulsome inventory was undertaken at the initial stage. That evaluation considered what are the priorities for preservation of the trees. Are they hedgerows? Are they in good health? Can they be retained? Can they be incorporated into a development? In that particular instance, the decision was made that in order to achieve the development objectives of the larger building, we can't save all of the trees. And as you heard from staff, the responsiveness to that is then to come up with alternatives for enhancement and compensation. The city has a fulsome one-to-one compensation policy. We've identified a portion of the site that we believe is appropriate for us to plant trees, as well as around the periphery of the site to ensure that it's appropriately landscaped and achieves, again, those environmental sustainability guidelines of how do you plant the streetscape, how do you plant trees along the municipal road allowances, how do you plant the parking lots to avoid heat islands. So we can't save all the trees, but certainly they're taken into consideration through those studies that we prepare, and the fulsome outcome is to ensure that there's appropriate compensation as required by city policy.
And through the chair, just again, the question being what in that consideration? I heard generally speaking business case considerations came into play. Could you unpack that? It does seem to be that we have a parking lot on either side of what is currently a hedgerow, and we're saying we cannot keep the hedgerow to build a parking lot on either side of it, and instead a grassy meridian will remain. So just wondering, is it for leveling the site? Is it for site plan? Like what are those business case considerations?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I mean, you mentioned leveling, so obviously grading considerations are a factor. It's a very large site. In order for us to be able to build and service and develop the site, there has to be cut and fill balance achieved on the property, and there's certain areas that physically can't be retained in their current physical conditions, and that results in that instance of removals.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, again, hearing this mix of we want to do the best that's possible, it also balances there, and I agree with both of those statements as separates, but what I'm trying to understand is which guide of logic is kind of leading which decisions in the development planning application. So the AEGD secondary plan sustainable use guidelines are just that, guidelines. And so every single clause reads where possible is encouraged for all of these beneficial things. What specifically of the AEGD guidelines, which are encouraged, will the proponent be considering for this site?
Since inception and our approach to the site, we retained a qualified team of professionals, arborists, hydrogeologists, karst experts, natural environment consultants. Dugan and Associates are our natural environment consultant. That consulting team conducted a fulsome inventory of what the existing conditions are on the property. We then take into consideration how is the property zoned today, where are those existing natural heritage features, and the mapping that evolves from that is to begin to identify what features obviously have significance in the context of provincial policy, and that's where no development shall occur. That captures the provincially significant wetland. There are other features in terms of woodlots that have all been mapped and appropriate buffers established for those, and they are also being protected, not just in this phase, but in subsequent phases. Where we begin to get into those additional layers of linkages, scattered tree cover, they're studied, they're analyzed, they become part of the evaluation, and we take those into consideration. Can they be retained, and can we achieve development? So as you say, it's a balancing act. If you want me to provide specific reference to all of those sustainable good principles of the AEGD, I would need a copy in front of me because they are extensive, but we have produced the necessary documentation through an environmental sustainability report that takes into consideration all those factors with conclusions that it is in fact implementing and achieving compliance with that policy framework. You heard the comments from the city planner. They're satisfied that we've achieved that objective, and a very long and rigorous process of dealing with city natural heritage staff and the Conservation Authority to make sure that all of those interests are addressed.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I'm very confident the boxes are ticked because with the exception of the buffer zones, which are regulated by the Conservation Authority and mandated, everything else is a if optional or if possible. So it's an easy exercise to tick the box there in some respects. So I appreciate it sounds really like there is a willingness. And so some of those things talk about district energy, whether that's rooftop solar, thinking about the connections there, whether that's green roofing. We've heard a little bit about stormwater management, a little bit about trees. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about some of the other factors. Hearing that there are many, so whether that's the social sustainability, the connections to the land, whether it's the connections to the broader natural heritage system, what's going on the roof, those are all things brought out in the AEGD. Just wondering if any of those have factored into the conversations.
Certainly, I mean, we are currently, we don't yet have a final tenant, but we've done preliminary design work. In the principles of sustainability, that will include, when we get to that stage and begin making submissions and final designs, will include LEED certification. So the buildings are designed in that regard to achieve those measures in terms of the built form. There's always consideration of the use of green building materials, again, as an additional layer. When we did the Amazon project, in order to ensure that the development is transit supportive, not everyone has a car, we actually worked with HSR, and they actually advanced and developed and modified their transit routing so that we could ensure that workers eventually of these buildings are provided with immediate access to the existing transit services. The roads, as I say, have been designed, and we agreed with the city's new design standards in terms of how these roads are to be built. They've gotten bigger. Development blocks are getting smaller because of the need to ensure that those designs, those detailed engineering designs, now take into consideration things like groundwater infiltration, LIDs, and those related environmental requirements. So it's an extensive, multifaceted approach to land development that now needs to acknowledge, and it does prioritize the importance of environmental sustainability.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, if I have time for one last question.
Go ahead.
Just specifically, again, wondering, when considering the roof, whether it's 2 floors, there's rooftop farms being discussed, that preserves the agricultural piece. That's another part of the AG, is keeping that local food component. Whether it's solar, anything like that. We've heard a bit about the stormwater use of the roofing. Is this kind of a forgotten space, or what's being thought? Again, hearing always a lot of potential, but wondering what is specifically planned for this application.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, I don't have those details, obviously, say we haven't got to that final stage yet. You talk about agriculture. Look at what they've done over at Aero Park. One of their tenants is InFarm. Innovators in agriculture. They're actually doing indoor farming and are now offering that production facility within Hamilton, as well as consulting throughout the province. The specifics on this one, obviously, roofs have a certain role to play in terms of stormwater management. They sometimes will hold back water for the purposes of quality and quantity control, but the principle of green roofs is one of the many layers that you need to address and respond to as part of LEED certification. So it's something that is on the list, and the design team needs to consider how they'll do it. It's an extensive roof, and certainly lots of opportunities there.
Thank you, Councillor. Speakers list. Next, I have Councillor Maureen Wilson, followed by Councillor McMeekin and Councillor Taddison. Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Webb. I think my questions are going to be more appropriate for staff. I've been listening to my colleague try to get details about the commitment to green roofs, about how the impervious surfaces are going to be treated, and about energy, and I'm not hearing specifics, so I'm going to have to ask when those specifics are going to be coming for public consumption, if not. So I think I'll wait for my report, my questions to staff, because I'm not hearing the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McMeekin.
Thanks, Chair Danko. Mr. Webb, we've crossed paths many times over the years, and you've always struck me as a detail guy. And it sounds very much to me, Mr. Chair, like the planner and his proponents know what they're doing. That having been said, I do have a couple of questions. You have referenced being in agreement with the staff report generally. What was your experience like in developing this project, and what specifically were your biggest challenges?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I mean, obviously, it's a large property. At the outset, the initiative is planned for. The lands are designated for employment uses. The lands are zoned for the employment uses. It's down to the details of understanding really what infrastructure is required to support that development, whether it be green infrastructure or sanitary sewers, storm sewers, transit, and water mains. Yeah. So I think it's not unlike any other development application now. That the layers of complexity are significant. The inputs are many. We effectively agreed to bring forward a phased plan of subdivision because, again, there are external issues that are still undecided for the balance of the lands. So it's a matter of, how do we get through the planning process as efficiently as we can, understanding there are tenants waiting for this building to be confirmed for its viability, and they will then, Panattoni has a roster, a significant roster who are watching the site. So for us, it's the ability to work collaboratively with staff, and I can tell you that the working relationship has been fantastic on both sides, and we're appreciative of that. So each and every application is different, and they're all equally complex.
That's helpful. Thanks for that. Can you say a little bit more about the kinds of jobs that will be provided, the employment?
Yeah, again, in terms of this specific building, Panattoni has a roster of users. What you see at the existing development across the road at Orlick Park, we've got the Amazon Fulfillment Center, we have InFarm, we have Siemens, more traditional manufacturing use. Their roster of people that they cater to include, larger automotive manufacturing, GM, BMW. They do distribution centers for Canadian Tire, Loblaws. They do courier distribution centers. So they have a significant roster. And there is still market activity. The economy is not in great shape, but there is still significant investment from this roster of prospective tenants to proceed with this site. So we don't have the details yet. Again, a bit of a chicken and egg. They're not going to sign a lease agreement until they have a perfect understanding of the timing for the deliverables.
I appreciate, Mr. Webb, your answers. All of us around this horseshoe are keen about employment, and we're keen about enhancing the industrial commercial assessment to residential assessment ratios. So a lot of things in your favor. As you say, the detail work is going to have to be worked out. I'd be really keen and green. I'd really be keen to hear about your green plans. And knowing a bit about your background, I look forward to hearing more about that. I know that's an interest of yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, councillors. Our speakers list have Councillor Taddison, followed by Councillor Cassar. Councillor Taddison, you're good? Okay. Councillor Cassar.
Thanks, Chair Danko. Question through you. The delegate spoke highly of the proponent, and I'm curious if the proponent has experience and expertise in non-greenfield development, which of course is the most sustainable way to develop. Through you, Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the 5 projects that I'm working on in the city today, they're all greenfield projects. They are working throughout the Greater Toronto Area. I know that there are certain projects within the urban areas of the city of Mississauga, the city of Brampton, where they are redeveloping existing facilities. So they're taking what effectively might be a brownfield condition and redeveloping those sites for their users. So yes, they are involved in the full gamut where they see market opportunities. If provided there are opportunities there, they will proceed with that range of introduction of industrial space to the marketplace.
Okay. Thank you for that answer, and just note the next item on the agenda is around that topic, but we'll get to that then. Next question is, in the secondary plan for the AEGD, the goal is to get to at least 50 jobs per hectare. So I'd like to ask how this development would get above that threshold. Through you, Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, again, the density and job targets are to be measured across the entirety of the Greenfield area, not just on the specific sites, but it is the target, and I can confirm that we are achieving those density targets on the projects that I'm involved in. We've been able to, at the end of the day, again, attract those end users based on their facilities that are in fact hitting that target.
Okay, thank you. Next question is also about the AEG secondary plan, section 8.2.11, natural heritage principles. In here it writes, I'll summarize, that through sustainable design and appropriate development, the employment district protects and enhances the natural environment. Development should be sensitive to the natural environment. Protect and integrate provincially and municipally significant natural features such as streams, valley lands, wetlands, mature trees, and forests. So I heard what is being done for the wetland, which is mandatory, that's required to have 30-meter separation. I noticed in the that some of the headland drainage features in the EIS will be paved over. So I'm just curious how that's consistent with the secondary plan I just read.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, let me first begin by, you made the comment with regards to what features are being protected and preserved. So yes, there is PSWs, the boundaries have been mapped, surveyed in consultation with the appropriate agencies and city staff, and the appropriate vegetative buffer zones applied. We've also found there are areas of the site that we can actually use as enhancement areas and compensation areas. We're effectively rounding out those areas and using them for enhancement of compensation for compensation purposes for additional plantings that will again all be subject to further monitoring and review. With regards to those headwater drainage features, they were all studied and analyzed, and at the end, the conclusions of those reports need to be able to demonstrate that the downstream impacts are not in any way prejudicial based on what we're doing. So yes, there are some features, there are some areas of the site where there are existing drainage courses through the site. They're not into the category of streams or significant water courses, but there are areas where, as part of our larger approach to the site, they are proposed to be altered, but their function will be retained, and that was confirmed through the findings of the environmental impact study, which at its conclusion needs to be able to demonstrate the form and function of all features are being retained. And we believe that we've achieved that objective.
Okay, that's all my questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Not seeing any further speakers, so thank you, Mr. Webb. I need a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation and delegation from the agent. Moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor Taddison. Thank you. That carries unanimously. Thank you. We have 2 registered delegations, and then I will ask if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak. First on my delegation list, Don McLean, which I believe is a virtual presentation. Don, whenever you're ready.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. And thank you also for the fact that you are continuing to allow people to come and speak on these kinds of matters, even though the province has eliminated the mandatory requirements. And that fact, of course, is that you don't have to make the requirements mandatory. That's their decision to remove that, but you can continue to do it. I'm thankful that Hamilton Council is doing that. We're in a difficult position for a number of reasons. First of all, we must stop destroying. It's no longer a matter of making trade-offs, balances, and so on. We are in a crisis situation, both in terms of climate and in terms of biodiversity and other features of the environment that have been negatively affected by the way in which we've proceeded. This proposal is the first industrial development in the headwaters area of 20 Mile Creek. So it's critical that we get it as right as possible. And 20 Mile Creek is one of the largest creeks in our community. It ends up in Jordan Harbor, flows into Niagara, but drains a large area of Hamilton as well. So a little bit of history. The Airport Employment Growth District, AEGD, started out a little over 20 years ago as what I would call a wet dream called the Aerotropolis. Council endorsed it, the old council, in 2006. But the scheme only got final approval from OMB in 2015. And as I said, this is the first outcome potentially of that. Calculation of establishing the AGD assumed that there was no industrial land available or could be made available in other parts of Hamilton, especially the Bayfront area. Something Slate has shown in the last month was very mistaken. So the proposal in front of you today could end up being the first actually built on AEGD lands. The Aerotropolis was sold to the public as a new industrial center of Hamilton and a hub of high-tech, high-paying jobs. Proposal here is for a warehouse and some additional warehouses still not detailed that are obviously much better located on old industrial lands along Burlington Street. So the eco-industrial rules being used for the draft conditions are also out of date. They were written more than a decade ago, before the city recognized the climate emergency and before it established, at least tentatively, a biodiversity action plan, which is out for consultation at this point. As a result, I think those rules, while they were helpful rules over what we had before, are still quite inadequate to protect foodlands and ecological features. There's an archaeological assessment required, but there's no mention of Indigenous consultation and involvement. So I'm curious as to how that happened. The removal of trees has been addressed by some of the councillors. The bulk of the trees lining the existing farm driveway are quite close to the property line, and it would seem they could all be kept, especially if we follow the instruction of the eco-industrial rules for the AGD to design with nature, I'm quoting this, design with nature by protecting streams, mature trees, wetlands, significant habitat, and integrating topography into developments. There's been a number of good questions with respect to what this is going to look like in terms of ecological features or environmental features of roof structures. There's no indication, as far as I've been able to find out, how many parking spaces are being calculated for and whether those will be of permeable pavement or not. There isn't, as far as I can see, anything with respect to the tributary streams. I got mentioned by the last speaker, those tributary streams are in fact critical to the provincially significant wetland. The wetland doesn't exist on its own. Those are the old rules that we used to think about. We can protect the wetland, everything will be okay. If you don't protect the water going in, it's not okay. The other piece that I wanted to raise is we're getting indication here now that there's a reason why we're only seeing one portion of this land being proposed for approval today. That there are issues with the other parts of it, and they would, if all put in place by the plans laid out by the developer, create a complete box around, almost a complete box around the provincially significant wetland. So why are we pushing ahead on a single part of this rather than sorting out all of these other issues? And wouldn't it make more sense for us to wait on this? So those are significant questions that I would raise about this. I'm concerned that once again, we are, while we're making some curtsies to the environment, the development itself is getting priority, and we're losing not only farmland, which the AEGD has unfortunately allowed that to happen, but we're also losing the environmental features that are associated with that farmland. Let me stop there. I don't think there's another question that I immediately have, but like I say, you're a council that you're stuck in a situation where we have this AEGD that was created on the basis of different ideas and different expectations, and certainly a lack of serious consideration of the environment, the agricultural feature of our community, food security, and so on.
Thank you, Don. You're a little bit over. I gave you a little bit of leeway there. Thank you for your presentation. Next delegate, we have David Bennett, who I believe is here in person. And Mr. Bennett is just making his way to the podium. Take your time.
Excuse me. Thank you for hearing me. My name's David Bennett. I'm a member of Hamilton 350 and the Hamilton chapter of the Council of Canadians. I'm sure the committee will be delighted to hear that I'm going to be extremely brief. A central submission is that in an unbiased comparison between the environmental and aesthetic damage these buildings will cause and any benefits, which we submit are illusory, can only have one reasonable conclusion: don't build them. Do we need more warehouses? Even presuming the answer is yes, we have much better places to put them, places where all the services they need are already in place. Let me just give you a few blurbs from the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority site about their industrial site at 1133 Industrial Drive. 60 acres of land, excellent marine road and rail connections, extensive warehousing, quick connections to supply chain partners, none of which, by the way, are available in the proposed site. And most of all, no destruction of the natural environment. The areas for the proposed construction are attractive countryside. Permission to build will turn that, and let's be honest here, will turn that into a pool surrounded by a construction site. We have to ask ourselves when vandalizing the environment is going to stop. Apart from the affront to our senses from wrecking more countryside, there is climate change, a mortal danger recognized explicitly by the city, and which this plan, I would submit, contravenes. Additionally, Statistics Canada reveals that Canada's population is growing at a record rate. The demand for agricultural land is only going to grow. Should we be so unwise as to destroy it? The AEG, which is the umbrella pan, is both a piece of greenwashing. It mentions eco-industrial 19 times and sustainable 20 times. Obsolete, it was passed by another council in another time. And even if you want to adhere to it, there are requirements in the plan that have not been complied with. Oh, and a last point about jobs. These are warehouses. Modern warehouses don't employ very many people at all. They're mainly run by robots. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I'm going to go to the public. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak to this matter today? Yes? And when you get to the podium, we're just going to ask for you to state your name, and there's a sign-in sheet there when you're done. Please don't forget.
Thank you. I'm Lynn Gates, and I live in Ward 1. I have a Master of Science in Community Nutrition, which involves looking at community-wide food sustainability and food systems. So I've been a lifelong concerned system about how all municipalities, certainly not just this one, has had a blatant regard for what is a rare resource in Canada, which is agricultural land. So I realize that this discussion today is based on a past decision-making that has occurred many years ago, and it is now zoned as industrial, which overlooks the fact that this was agricultural land. And I think I'm just volunteering to speak now because it's just a prime example of the anger this has created and the lack of trust in politicians, the lack of trust in planning staff, the lack of trust in developers, that this has continued over the past 30, 40 years and continues to happen with the enforced urban expansion. And it creates just a sense of regret and loss because we don't have a lot in Canada, and unfortunately, municipalities have been given the responsibility to try and have ensure that we keep what little that we have that is totally not replaceable. And as our population increases, if there are any worldwide and political emergencies, we have seen with the pandemic how supply lines can be affected, that food is not looked at as a national security item. And I realize, like, your back is against the wall. These decisions have been made. This is now industrial. But the fact that that decision was made on a land that requires all of these other factors to be considered, such as being on a headway of a waterway, being on a wetland, which we have eliminated about 85% of them in this region. So why in the heck would it had ever been approved in the first place that this was appropriate land, agricultural land, on which to put a fucking warehouse, right? So that's just my comment. I realize that even as interested citizens, we have no luck in this or having any kind of decision change, but so please try and enforce any environmental mediation that you could possibly do to your greatest extent. Thank you.
Thank you, and just please remember to sign in.
Over here. Thank you.
Going back to the public, item 10.2, application for approval of draft plan of subdivision for lands located at 9236 and 9322 Dickinson Road West in Glanbrook. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak to this matter? For a second time, any other members of the public that wish to speak to item 10.2 on today's agenda? And a third and final time, any members of the public that wish to speak to item 10.2, lands at Dickinson Road West in Glanbrook. Not seeing any further members of the public. So at this time, I need a mover and a seconder that the public submissions regarding this matter were received and considered by the committee, and that the public meeting was closed. Moved by Councillor Taddison, seconded by Councillor Wang. Thank you. That is approved unanimously. So I'm going to go to the report and recommendations. I need a mover and a seconder to put it on the floor, and then we will open up for any discussion. Councillor Taddison moved, seconder. Councillor Wang. Thank you. Discussion on the report and staff recommendations. Councillor Maureen Wilson, please go ahead.
Sorry, Chair, can you come back to me? I'm just trying to find my notes and I don't want to hold up the committee, but I would like to be put on the list. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Councillor Cassar.
Thank you, Chair Danko. In the report on page 8, I was talking about new development and site alteration should not be permitted for woodlands and so on, and it talks about the EIS and some of the threatened, rare, and endangered species that have been seen on the property during surveys. They are painted turtle, snapping turtle, barn swallow, black-throated blue warbler, belted kingfisher, wild indigo dusky-winged butterfly, monarch, which is endangered, spotted spreadwing, eastern meadowlark, eastern wood pewee, red-headed woodpecker, wood thrush. There are several species it says that won't be affected because mitigation measures will be in place. It was sort of touched on, but I'd like to ask staff, what are those mitigation measures, please? Through you, Chair.
Through the chair to Councillor. So as mentioned, there is a habitat restoration plan that's required as a condition of this draft plan of subdivision. And the intent is to recreate habitats and enhance adjacent natural features, such as creating south-facing slopes for some of the turtles, or creating gravel banks for some of the snakes and other wildlife. And the intent is to reestablish these habitat areas for these wildlife to create nesting areas, hibernating characteristics, and also little microclimate conditions. And as part of this requirement, a monitoring plan will also be in place to ensure that once these habitat restoration features are in place, that they are active and are supportive of these requirements.
Okay, thank you. I know there's good intentions here, but I think when you're removing so much of the area, it's really hard to recreate habitat. But I'll move on to the next question. A sustainability report was mentioned. I didn't see that. Maybe I missed it. Maybe someone could point to where that is and where we may be able to see that, please.
Through the chair to the councillor. So your question is speaking to the sustainability elements of this design?
No, there was mentioned that there was a sustainability report that existed somewhere. Is that true, and is it available for us to review?
Through the chair to the councillor, there is a design and energy enhancement plan. Essentially, that is a requirement of the subdivision that identifies sustainability criteria. So that has been provided in support of this application, and some recommendations of that report are implemented in the design, such as the low impact development features, stormwater management, storage on the roof, grass swales throughout the site, as well as permeable pavement throughout the parking areas. Those are elements that were incorporated based on the recommendations of that assessment.
Through the chair to Councillor Anita Fayback, Director of Development Planning. Just to expand on what Mr. Bello indicated, there is a bit of a summary that starts on the bottom of page 16 of the staff report, which identifies that we did receive an urban design, energy and environmental assessment report. And as Mr. Bello indicated, it does identify opportunities for energy conservation, green building standards, LID, stormwater management. Some of those items, like the LID and stormwater management, are addressed through draft plan conditions that are attached to the staff report, particularly the LID measures and that there be enhanced swales and infiltration galleries that are intended to improve the water runoff collection from the roof, and the ongoing monitoring and maintenance of those. So those are addressed through the conditions. There's also a site plan application, and some of the items that would be further reviewed and addressed at site plan would be dealt with through those site plans, site plan condition, and possibly the need for a site plan agreement to ensure that those are maintained in perpetuity.
Okay, thank you, Director Fayback. Next question. One of the delegates brought up the topic of Indigenous consultation. It wasn't noted in the report, was the claim. If someone could comment on where that fits into this process. Has it happened? Will it happen in the future? Overall, but specifically also to 20 Mile Creek and its tributaries in the provincially significant wetland. Through you, Chair.
Through the chair to the councillor, as part of our archaeology master plan, that's a council-approved document, there's Indigenous consultation that's required through the undertaking of the archaeological assessments, so the stage 1 and possible stage 2, 3, and 4 archaeological assessments. And the requirement through those guidelines is that the consultant that's undertaking the studies consult with the indigenous populations, so that would be addressed through that process. In terms of the development of the secondary plan, I don't know that information offhand, but I can follow up with the policy, with the staff in the Sustainable Communities Group to see what clarification they can provide in terms of what consultation occurred in the development of the secondary plan.
Okay, thank you. One more question if I have time, Chair.
Go ahead.
The delegate for the proponent threw out a lot of big numbers, billions of dollars in development and investment. But what really matters to the corporation and the residents of the city of Hamilton are the revenue that we can generate, which is not in the billions of dollars. I was wondering if staff could comment in general. I understand it wouldn't be necessarily possible for the specific site here, but on the property tax productivity of this kind of development versus infill development. Through you, Chair.
General Manager.
So through the chair, we don't have that information at our fingertips in terms of what the expected tax assessment would be on the site. That's something we could try to dig up and provide that information. It's difficult to do until the actual construction has been completed and NPAC does their assessment of the property. But we can try to identify what that potential uplift would be for this project. It would just take a little bit of time.
Yeah, fair answer. I just think it's important to highlight that when we talk about the amount of assessment growth or how much is invested by a company or of companies, that doesn't have a direct impact or betterment for the lives of our residents. The ability to invest in parks or services, it comes down to the property tax that can be generated. So totally accept the general manager's response. I just wanted to highlight that that is really what we should be talking about. And I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. So on my speakers list, I have Councillor Alex Wilson, followed by Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. And through you to Natural Heritage Planning staff or General Manager Thorne, I heard a mention of a wildlife restoration plan. Just wondering about the phasing of that. When are we coming back to that? Does that come through staff delegated authority, so we'll never see the wildlife restoration plan for the site? We heard mention of restoration of turtle habitat, some other things. Just wondering, when is that plan an actual document that exists, and who says yes to it?
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, as a condition of the draft plan of subdivision, as mentioned, habitat restoration plan is required. So that is a condition that staff, through the review of the proponent's resubmission, would be reviewed. So essentially, that will be required under phase 1. And subsequently, should this application be approved, that would be a requirement of phase 1. And should a proponent proceed with phase 2, perhaps there's a likelihood of a requirement for the same.
Thank you for that answer. And through you, Chair, which department, which staff is doing that review, and under what policies or guidelines are they reviewing the natural heritage or the wildlife restoration plan being submitted by the proponent?
That would be through the natural heritage staff, as well as the Niagara Escarpment or Niagara Peninsula Escarpment or Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. They are obviously to regulate the provincial significant wetland, and they have an interest in that as well.
And again, through you, Chair, just really trying to find, where on the city website is this within our natural heritage policy, and the guidelines are set out in our official plan? What is the matrix that staff reviewing this application are using, given that we have a forthcoming biodiversity action plan? Just wondering, what is the policy framework that is lead in that process? What is guiding that?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Wilson, I will defer to my colleague, Melissa Kitty. She's a natural heritage staff.
Thank you. Through the chair to the councillor, we are using the framework of our policies of no negative impacts and looking through that, through the process of the environmental impact statement and the information that's gathered through that environmental impact statement. So in my review, I'll be looking for have they provided what they have told us in that environmental impact statement, looking at the details of what, those turtle nesting habitats, for example, are they in the right location? Those kinds of opportunities, but it's really through that, the measures that have been outlined by the environmental impact statement that I'll be continually reviewing and going back to.
Thank you. Through Chair, what I heard was no negative impact as one of the guiding frameworks. Under the AEGD secondary plan, I read it that we can talk about preventing negative impacts or even going so far as to enhance the natural system. Do we have an enhancement-based policy, or is the review that's being done to talk about no net loss or a one-to-one compensation? Just wondering, this is a conversation conservation authorities are having as well. What is our kind of standing policy, given that the AEGD secondary plan does give us some leeway to talk about enhancement as well?
So through the chair, again, the policies are talking about no negative impacts, and through the, there's a variety of mitigation measures that have been identified to mitigate for those impacts. One of the largest one is the providing the vegetation protection zone for both the provincially significant wetland as well as the significant woodland that's associated with that wetland. Those are We're looking at, we do have policies in the official plan that speak to planting up those areas with native species specifically. So that's one of the areas, but no negative impact is the test that we need to be meeting, and that's through mitigation measures that have been identified.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, just following up on that vegetation protection zone, I'm assuming we are going with the minimum of 30 meters. In this and in most applications, we're trying for that 30-meter buffer range, just seeking confirmation.
Through the chair, we have minimums identified in the official plan, and it's through the environmental impact statement to evaluate those minimum vegetation protection zones. In this particular application, the 30-meter vegetation protection zone from the provincially significant wetland is being provided, and a variable 10 to 15 meter vegetation protection zone is being provided for the significant woodland. It's 10 meters on the northwest side. Because of the composition of that woodlot, it was not sensitive. There weren't sensitive species identified. It was planted on fill, and that was the reason why a lesser buffer was provided for that in particular in that area.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, just very much appreciative of the specificity and like depth of the answer, and it seems coming from memory, so appreciative of that. I had a follow-up question, and then I think I'll have to be put on for a second time hearing the ding, is just around these vegetation protection zones. So something we know is we're being asked to become a bird-friendly city. We've signed some initial declarations there. We know this is one of the very few areas in our entire city where there is endangered turtle populations and species at risk of turtle population as well. We also know that for bird nesting and for turtle nesting, oftentimes 30 is not enough for some amphibians and avian species. And so if that is a goal, if this is one of, say, the 4 locations in the city that we have species at risk, does our forthcoming biodiversity action plan, not specific to this site, but just wondering, do we have the planning ability? So if coming from that biodiversity action plan, we said in these areas we should have 50 meters, let's say, hypothetically, will we have to go through a secondary plan amendment, the AEGD, or does that language protect and enhance give us enough language to extend the buffer in the future?
Through the chair to the councillor, as Ms. Kitty indicated, the vegetation protection zones are outlined in our Urban Hamilton official plan and as well in the Rural Hamilton official plan. They are very specific in terms of the different kinds of features in the wetlands and the VPZs that are required as delineated by the provincial policy statement. So there would need to be an official plan amendment to implement vegetation protection zones that would differ from what our current policies contain.
Thank you, Chair. If it's all right with you, I'll go on the speakers list a second time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Maureen Wilson, followed by Councillor Tattison.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the questions with respect to the work that will be done at site plan, but I'm still a little unclear about the scope of that work and the opportunity for the public to understand further or be informed of the details. So I would like to go back just to make sure I do understand. And I'm looking specifically at 8.15.3 of the, I think it's in the AEGD secondary plan, and it's the Eco-Industrial Design Guidelines and Urban Design Guidelines. It says may incorporate an evaluation system which would provide specific criteria for the assessment and development applications through the Energy and Environmental Assessment Report. The evaluation system may include criteria including but not limited to green building materials, energy efficient building design, water conservation, waste reduction, on-site stormwater management, gray water reuse, light pollution management, urban heat island effect management, on-site renewable energy generation, and the use of a district energy system. So my question is, when will the public and this body be apprised of those commitments? I think the questions were being asked of the applicant, and the answers weren't provided. So I just want to make sure I understand.
Through the chair to the councillor, the site plan process is not a public process and it is delegated to staff. However, there is an opportunity, and this has happened through many files, is staff working with the ward councillor to ensure that they are apprised of the application and the studies that are that have been submitted and reviewed and what's being proposed by the applicant.
Thank you, through the chair. I have great confidence in the ward councillor. However, given given the significance of it and the history of this, is there any capacity within that framework for interested members of council to be apprised?
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, certainly members of council can also be included in that conversation. Planning staff would just need to be advised as to which of those councillors would like to be included and apprised, and we can certainly coordinate those conversations between staff and the councillors.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'd like to pivot, if I could. I wasn't clear in my understanding of the employment density target, realizing it may be tenant specific, but could you help me in understanding the number of jobs per hectare that are anticipated in this initiative? Thank you, through the chair.
Through the chair to the councillor, I don't have the details in terms of this particular application, but in terms of the overall planning for the AEGD secondary plan, the 37 jobs per hectare was the basis for that, for the land needs assessment that was ultimately approved by the OMB in 2015. So the 37 jobs per hectare reflected that background work that was done as part of the OP and as part of the secondary plan was adopted by council to ensure that the city could meet the overall places to grow employment forecast of 50 jobs per hectare.
So, thank you. So just so I understand, we have a 37.5 hectare proposal, and we don't have a sense from the applicant. I know it's a planning application, of how many jobs will be generated on this significant warehouse site. 400,000 square meter warehouse, 40,000, beg your pardon. Through the chair.
So through the chair, as Anita said, we don't until we know the actual tenant mix and have confirmation of the tenant mix, we wouldn't know on a site-by-site basis. But just to put it a little bit in perspective, keeping in mind sort of the official plan targets that Anita just mentioned, if you look to the Aero Park site, which is pretty similar in size, I think it's in the 40, 50 hectare kind of range, we're just over 4,000 jobs within that block,
right.
So significantly exceeding the employment density targets of the official plan.
Okay. Thank you. I think it was Dr. McLean, if I have time for one more question, Chair, referenced that this is a first in terms of 20 Mile Creek. Could someone on staff assist me in understanding what will be the impact, or how did we take into consideration the plan for the small, they are small, but the water courses in the plan for headland drainage features in the footprint on Block 1?
Through the chair to the councillor, through the development of the Airport Employment Growth District secondary plan, there was a detailed sub-watershed study that was completed. So that would have formed the basis for identifying the different types of land uses and developing the land use concept and the policies for the secondary plan. So if you recall, that's why this site in particular is actually triple zoned. So there's two different industrial zones, and there's also the P5 natural heritage zone. And so all of those were derived from that sub-watershed study, which was done as part of that secondary planning process.
I'll cede my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Go to Councillor Tattison, followed by Councillor Alex Wilson for a second time.
Just a quick question to staff. Does Amazon lie within the Airport Employment Growth District?
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, it does.
And Infarm as well?
Through the chair to the councillor, yes.
And I believe there's also a series of storage units that exist there that represents quite a significant footprint.
Through the chair to the councillor, that's correct. If you want me to describe the generic boundaries of the AGD, I can try and do that.
I know them. I think staff know them as well. I just want to point out that I think the waters that come from those areas as well they're part of the headland of the 20 Mile Creek. It's a bit of a rhetorical question.
Through the chair to the councillor, we don't have that information in front of us, but we can certainly follow up.
Well, I know it to be a fact that it is, so I just wanted to state that they're managing certain tributaries correctly right now. There are some issues with water flow just between ditches and roads and existing residents that live in low areas and so forth. But the water is being managed, and I just wanted to understand that with those developments, that is in fact happening, correct?
Through the chair to the councillor, those properties would have followed similar planning processes with similar reviews and conditions that would be required.
Okay, I'm going to leave it at that and then make comments later. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alex Wilson for a second time.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, really appreciated that specificity of some of the buffers. Just one kind of last question in that vein, and then moving on to a different stream of questioning. Just looking to better understand the trees that are being lost here for the purpose of parking. It says quite explicitly in the AEGD guidelines for the secondary plan, wherever possible, parking should be compact, minimize its impact on the natural environment, et cetera. And I'm just wondering what conversations happened between staff and the proponent around that provision within the AEGD secondary plan guidelines, and if this is the recommendation, why are we confident that this is the best parking arrangement given the tree protection impacts?
Through the chair to the councillor, not aware of any sort of very specific conversations in terms of those specific trees in the parking area. I think, as we've spoken of earlier, I mean, it's looking at protecting some of those key features and then looking at where development could possibly occur and those sort of those checks and balances. So that tree protection plan, I think, as we indicated, has not yet been finally approved. So there's still the opportunity to have the conversation. As Ms. Kitty indicated, some of the tree species or some of the species identified for removal, we were looking for a little bit more information on to make sure that there are no opportunities to save those trees. And we can certainly have a conversation with Mr. Webb and his clients to see if there's any further opportunity to protect those trees or perhaps reconfigure some of those parking areas.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I think what we're hearing is what is the cost of a tree in this city? And I think that's a question we're asking quite literally through the forthcoming tree protection policies we're doing. But is it the cost of a couple hundred square feet? Is it the cost of talking to the neighboring landowner about a parking lot being on the other side of the tree line? These are all financial bases, but in the secondary plan, it's quite clear we should be planning based on the natural heritage system. But a lot of the planning regarding the parking lot is based on the constraint of the property boundaries and the grid that we're working within. And so we have two different competing value systems. And a lot of my questions have been not to demonize this specific applicant, but to understand, like, how do these different value systems come together, and what is the impact? And I think that's what we're seeing in front of us. And so through you to General Manager Thorne, I think we've heard quite explicitly a request from delegates to review the AEGD in a more holistic way, to think about how our forthcoming policies on tree protection, biodiversity, some of those things impact the existing 2015 policy framework, as well as what we know about science, climate change, things that have changed since then. To what extent can we do that, given that it's a secondary plan? What is the process for tweaking or adding it? And again, I want to come back to the clause that Councillor Maureen Wilson read out, which is that we can set these standards as well. And so what's possible to do just within those standards, and what would require more substantial tweaks to the plan?
So through the chair, we don't have in our work plan right now, we'll review an update comprehensively of the secondary plan itself and the official plan policies it contains. But what we do have under development is a number of the different guidelines that you're speaking of that would then inform the application implementation of those official plans. And you've seen some of those already. If you look at the Complete Streets guidelines, for example, which kind of put some flesh on the bones of some of the principles that are talked about within the AEGD secondary plan. Similarly, the low impact development guideline and Complete Street guideline update to our engineering servicing standards. Again, those start to put a bit more, they aren't at the level of official plan policy. You would not typically put that kind of detailed engineering guideline into official plan policy, but they become the guidelines that then applicants would live by as they are making their submissions. So that's the kind of thing we've also identified through some of the work that you've seen around the urban boundary expansion area secondary plan policies. A whole series of guidelines being developed for the types of submissions we would want to see on things like energy and environment reports, on tree protection plans, and so on. So we're trying to provide more information at the front end for applicants as to what our expectations are as a city in terms of the content of those kinds of submissions. So that's really the focus of our work right now, as opposed to actually going back and modifying the underlying official plan policy principles that are contained in the secondary plan.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, really appreciated that answer. Just to the second part of the question, so that's what it would take to change the policy. It sounds like a lot of staff time, not currently in the project, but then the question is, under the existing guidelines, and those guidelines are being developed right now, so even more of an opportunity. I'm basically wondering, when is something the wall? Like, when does it become, oh, we need an official plan amendment for that, we need a secondary plan amendment for that, versus what is something that we can use those guidelines to move forward with? So I think back to the last planning committee where conditional approval was given with respect to permeable paving. And it was explicit in the approval that there would be permeable paving in the final result. What are the types of things that, in voting on this today, are within committee's jurisdiction discretion right now? And then I think to Councillor Maureen Wilson's point, what's forthcoming? What's later down the road is, I think, something we're all trying to get a fine point on here.
So through the chair, in terms of what's before you now, so this is the draft plan of subdivision application. So as was noted earlier, at this stage, you're not sort of modifying or approving or changing the principle of the land use that's permitted, as was noted earlier. So the principle that these lands will develop for employment industrial uses and what those industrial uses are defined as is established through the existing policy permissions. Through the draft plan process, which is before you now, this is where we're typically looking at street layouts, block layouts, and then all of the conditions that would have to be met before these lots can be registered. And that's why you have a particularly extensive list of conditions attached to the draft plan approval. These would all be the technical submissions that at a delegated staff level would have to be cleared prior to final registration of the plan of subdivision. And then, as Anita noted, there's the site plan review process as well. And it really is sort of getting to more and more precise level of detail and fine-grained detail as you move through the process. So at the official plan level, you are typically talking about broad principles that admittedly aren't overly specific and determinative of how you meet those principles. That's typically what you spell out at the official plan stage, and that's a lot of the policy reference that were made today are really speaking at that kind of level. And then it's through these technical submissions that will come with the clearance of the draft plan conditions when we'd start to drill into what does that actually mean in terms of this particular site and how do you do grading or drainage or site alteration or whatever it may be on this particular site in order to kind of implement those broad principles and visions set out in the official plan.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, what I've heard from residents today, by and large, has been an understanding that given the planning process, given that, you know, these lands are zoned for development for light industrial, I've heard from most delegates an understanding of that and then a request, so do the best you can given the situation you're in. And what I'm still struggling to understand is because a lot of the things I heard from delegates with respect to tree protection, corridor setbacks, and that habitat restoration plan are all things that sound like the broad strokes to me. It sounds like that is of committee's decision today, is saying that we should not be putting this over water courses. That if we have concerns about the tree protection plan, now is the time to bring those up and enshrine those in a recommendation to formalize them. And so just seeking some guidance as we move out of this maybe question period to more of the deliberation period about what is the structure that could look like in committee today, as well as what is appropriate to talk about today and what is too narrow or too specific and would best come back at a later date.
So through the chair, I'd suggest that probably what I would suggest members of council look at is those draft plan conditions, and do those draft plan conditions set the stage for the kinds of technical review that you would want to see come back as this application moves forward into this sort of finer grain level of review and analysis. So it is through those conditions that we try to make sure as staff we're capturing all of the work that has to happen kind of downstream. And like I said, that's why you see a pretty extensive list of conditions on this particular application. So I would suggest that is an area where council could look at if there are gaps or additional areas that you are looking to make sure are addressed at a staff level before it gets a final approval and registration. That's where I would suggest you would look.
Thank you, Chair. Very last question from me, back to the natural heritage side of things. In the secondary plan for the airport and the AAGD, it talks about fish spawning habitat, and it uses the word indirect or supportive fish spawning habitat, and several of the subject water features within this planning application within the AAGD are noted as supportive or indirect fish habitat. What does that designation use when we use it, and what types of policies or considerations are at play when developing in, around, on top of that type of designated fish habitat? Thank you.
Through the chair to the councillor, indirect fish habitat is from looking at it from the point of context of what the fish need downstream. So inputs of trees, leaves, ensuring sediment control, that kind of component is really what indirect fish habitat is. In terms of the protection in our policies, indirect fish habitat would, the minimum vegetation protection zones required for that, it would be the 15 meters on each side of that feature. However, evaluation through the EIS or the environmental impact statement would be required, and a lesser vegetation protection zone could occur.
Thank you, Chair. Just really appreciative, staff, for the deep dive and answers to all these kind of varied and specific questions. Really appreciative.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to put myself on a speaker's list for a couple comments, and then I'll go to Councillor Taddison for the last word. So, Councillor Wang, if you could take the chair. We've had a pretty broad-ranging discussion today, so I just want to bring this back to the context of the decisions that's before us today. We're talking about the plan of subdivision that's within the current existing zoning permissions and secondary plan and within the existing policies. That's the decision that's before us today. Definitely hearing from committee some concern and uncertainty about previous secondary plans, the existing policies that are in place. And I think as a committee, we have an opportunity to set some clear expectations of what we would like to see when applicants are before us, even on issues that are not necessarily part of the planning process. I think just from my perspective, I'd like to see some more specifics, especially when there is a long list of draft conditions. I'd like to see how are you actually going to meet those conditions, appreciating that staff have full confidence that they're going to work through that. But when we're talking about a site, I think as significant as this, and some of the really great work that Panattoni's done, as Councillor Wilson has described in Europe, I want to see that here. Just tell us what you're going to do. It's a little bit difficult and somewhat frustrating from my perspective to be asked to make this decision on a portion of the site and not see the context of the whole site, especially when we have a provincially significant wetland that is essentially, as was mentioned, being surrounded and walled off. And then, the question is what is the value of that wetland if it's just, an island? Councillor Cassar, I think, brought up some really important points. This council just set strategic direction on tax density being a priority. And I know we've had talks about this before with our planning staff, but actually including tax density in the planning approvals process is something that we need to do. And I think it's absolutely clear today when we're seeing this kind of application, we want to know what is that tax density? What is the use of that land? Are we being as productive? Is this the highest and best use? And that being part of the official planning approvals process. And just last word, I've said many times, and I know members of council have said as well as the mayor, that one of the biggest issues that we have as a municipality is the over-reliance on residential taxpayers, and we need to develop more commercial and industrial tax base. This is that, but I think as a committee, this committee is much more detail-oriented than perhaps in the past, and I think we'd like to see some of those specifics. So we have an opportunity to work with staff on, on future applications, on, when things come forward, what it is that we need to see to make an informed decision. So anyway, those are my 2 cents. Really appreciate the discussion today. I'll take the chair back, and then I'll go to Councillor Tattison as a second-time speaker, and last on the speaker's list.
Just one more question for planning through the chair. It's my understanding that the job density should be 37.5 jobs per hectare. Is that correct for the overall AEG district?
Through the chair to the councillor, my understanding is that it is 37.
Okay. Thank you so much for that clarification. And then this particular development is going to achieve 18 jobs per hectare, correct?
Through the chair to the councillor, Mr. Webb has verbally indicated it would be a minimum of 42, but as Mr. Thorne indicated, until there's a specific user, it's difficult to make assumptions in terms of what that would be.
Okay, thank you so much. That helps me clarify that. I thought I heard somewhere along the lines it was 18, and that raised some concern for me. So going forth with that, I'm going to make some final comments here. This particular development is it's a small piece of a bigger picture. I ran a campaign supporting the development of the Airport Employment Growth District. I want to bring more jobs to Hamilton. I want to help diversify our economy. So even though this is frustrating for local residents, I'm going to take a bigger Hamilton picture of this, because what I feel is that this is going to be good for our economy in the future. What are our drivers in Hamilton going to be? It's the port, it's the network of highways that we're so well connected to with railways for transportation systems, it's our biomed sector, and it's our airport. So the Airport Employment Growth District, I think it's going to help grow our city's economy. It's going to grow our industrial commercial tax base. I think it's going to improve infrastructure in the immediate area and to connecting roads. It's going to help take big trucks off our small rural roads that are being chewed up right now by big heavy trucks. We're already in the process right now of drilling a huge trunk sewer all the way from these lands over to 56 to go down to the wastewater plant. So it doesn't make sense to stop now. It does make sense, and I applaud my fellow councillors for asking all these questions in order that this growth is balanced between our economy and our environment. I just want it to be said that I support green environmental initiatives, but I also want it noted that I also support responsible economical growth. And I think that our city planners have done an excellent job at answering and taking our feedback, and I believe that this plan can achieve both. So I'm going to support this plan. I know it's not the most popular plan in the area, but I'm thinking from a bigger picture, what's good for Hamilton, and I do think that the development of the Airport Growth District will be good for Hamilton, as long as this council is a watchdog and makes sure that that growth is responsible. So thank you, and those are my last words on this.
Thank you, Councillor. I do have one final speaker, Councillor Cassar.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I was on the list earlier, and I was trying to get back on there. Yeah, some final comments here from me. We absolutely need to encourage more industrial growth and commercial growth. Definitely need to do that, and we all agree on that, to balance the tax revenue. But we need to do it thoughtfully, as have some of the questions here have pointed out. One key in one example, talking about a road widening mentioned by the applicant. So the point is we need a wider road there in the AEGD. We already know we have a $2 billion deficit on roads. But, okay, development charges are going to be paying for that. Okay, so that's the first life cycle. What about the second life cycle? Well, worry about that later. Well, unfortunately, 50 years ago, 25 years ago, other councils have said that, we'll build it now, we'll worry about it later. And here we are with a deficit that it's actually growing every year. So we really need to be mindful of that, to use Councillor Wang's term, thinking about future generations. So that, I think, is also looking at the bigger picture, like Councillor Taddison was saying. Also part of the bigger picture is we're losing on average 319 acres of farmland in Ontario every day. We're rapidly losing the ability to feed our population. I don't want Hamilton to be part of that. We're also in a climate crisis as declared by the City Council. So building sprawling warehouses and removing hundreds of trees, just in phase one, probably more to come, isn't a climate mitigation or adaptation strategy. Although, yes, there are things that are being done here, and it's not lost on me, on all the environmental protections and sustainable development that is being proposed. But when you're taking away farmland and habitat and encouraging more transportation to rural areas, that is not climate adaptation and mitigation. Also mentioned was the biodiversity crisis. We're in the 6th great extinction. We have our biodiversity action plan out for consultation. So further incursions into sensitive areas is contrary to that, and particularly the tributaries for 20 Mile Creek. But looking at the application in isolation, of course, it makes sense because it, consistent with PPS, conforms to a place to grow, fits with the official plan. all that works. But since the decision to expand our urban boundary for the AEGD in 2015, which has been argued was short-sighted at the time, a lot has changed. The province has forced a further expansion of our urban boundary chair. Land has been removed from the Greenbelt for development, and via Bill 97 and the proposed update to the provincial planning statement, it will allow up to 170,000 more severances on farmland. That's all across Ontario. So the landscape, figuratively and quite literally, unfortunately, has changed dramatically over the last 8 years. So we need to course correct and adapt, in my opinion. That's how organisms and ecosystems survive. You adapt and course correct, and those that don't perish. So this has been played out time and time again. So in my view, it's irresponsible to continue to allow farmland and sensitive natural areas to be subordinated to sprawling development. We need to develop, yes, we need to bring more jobs, we need to bring more tax revenue. I think we can do it in a better way. So I can't support this as it's proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. You're the last speaker, so if there's no further discussion, we're going to go to the vote. It was moved by Councillor Taddison, seconded by Councillor Wang. This is on the staff report and recommendations to approve as detailed before you. All in favor or opposed? The vote came up. And that carries on a vote to 6-4. So committee, we have, I think, what, 2 more items I think are relatively brief. So if you're okay, we'll continue. Okay. Item 10.3, implementation of changes to the environmental remediation and site enhancement community improvement plan, community improvement project area, and associated financial assistance programs. I'm going straight to public.
This is not a traditional public meeting. It's a statutory public meeting, so if I've been told there is no staff presentation. So I would go to calling if there's anyone who wishes to speak, and then it can be closed.
Okay, so we are on item 10.3. This is changes to the environmental remediation and site enhancement community improvement plan. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak to this item? I'm not seeing any members of the public. Second time, any members of the public wish to speak to item 10.3? And third and final time, are there any members of the public that wish to come forward to speak to item 10.3 on today's agenda, changes to the erase program? So seeing none, and there was no public submissions received, I need a mover and a seconder that the public meeting be closed. Moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor McMeekin. And that carries unanimously. Thank you. So on the report, a mover and a seconder to approve the recommendations in the report and to put it on the floor, moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor McMeekin. Is there any discussion on item 10.3? Not seeing any. So all in favor or opposed? That carries unanimously. Discussion items. We have one discussion item before us. This is item 11.1, Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee report. Mover and a seconder to approve the 4 recommendations in the report and put it on the floor. Who'd like to move this? Councillor Alex Wilson, thank you. Councillor Beattie. Is there any discussion on the recommendations from the Heritage Committee? Councillor Alex Wilson, go ahead.
Thank you. Given all the conversations we're having and the stress that heritage planning staff are put in, I just want to take a moment to say this is a really great good news story in recommendation 2. We're designating a heritage property 3 Main Street in downtown Dundas. It's really exciting. The owner of the site's looking to open up a bit of a pub, keeping it very consistent with the heritage designation. It's rare when we talk about heritage, we're not having a conversation about trying to save a building that's in peril or that it's been taken off the register, given some of the recent provincial changes. So just want to take a moment and appreciate that we can still find some ways through when we have supportive property owners and great work of staff and community members coming together. So thank you.
Thank you for highlighting that, Councillor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, so moved by Councillor Alex Wilson, seconded by Councillor Beattie. All in favor or opposed? That carries unanimously. Item 14.1, the General Manager's update. No update for today, General Manager Thorne? Okay, thank you. So nothing to receive then. We have the closed session minutes, item 15.1 from May the 16th, 2023. I need a mover and seconder to approve the closed session minutes as presented and that they remain confidential. Moved by Councillor Francis, seconded by Councillor Nan. We'll get you on the board today. That is unanimous and adjournment. Mover and a seconder to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Francis, seconded by Councillor Tattison. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.